So let me talk a little bit then about now the paint. So paint is basically, with paint you have like the pigment, and all paint has the pigment, and then you have the binder. And the binder for oil paint is like linseed oil, a type of linseed oil. With acrylic, it's acrylic resin. It's an alkyd. When it comes to tempera paint, it's egg yolk.
Oh,
And
wow.
fresco painting, it's wet cement. Now with watercolor paint, it's gum arabic. And gum arabic is basically this sort of like tasteless, odorless. It's almost like it comes out almost like a sap. This is dried in powder form, and it comes from the acacia tree. There's some in Sudan and Australia. And so if you have just raw pigment, like I have this ultramarine blue pigment, and you have some gum arabic, you can basically make your own watercolors. Because the amazing thing about gum arabic is that when it gets wet and then dries again, it's sort of it basically evaporates, right? So just what you have left is just the pigment. You don't really have so much of the binder left anymore. So here I have the two components. I'm going to just add a little bit of water.
How do you know the ratio, or is that just something you learn as you go?
So the more it could depend on what you want to do. So it depends on how thick you want it to be. It could also depend on how much viscosity you want there to be, how slow you want it to dry. Usually when you have more gum arabic, it just takes longer to dry. So that's up to you. That's up to you. So obviously, depending on if it's a tube or if it's a pan palette paint, you kind of have like a different consistency. And some brands, or quite a few brands, they have other fillers to it. They could add chalk, other fillers that can, affect the coloring, extend the coloring, and so on. But this, in a nutshell, is basically watercolor paint. So I could do washes and stuff with that. You could, if you have your paint, you can add just gum arabic to it, and it sort of extend the flow, slow the drying, and things like that. But what's amazing, again, is that when it dries, you're just going to have pretty much the pigment. And the pigment will pretty much just be settling into that weave of paper that we talked about. But because of the sizing in the paper, if there's a lot of sizing, then the pigment particles, these little grains, think of them almost like grains of sand, grains of pigment, they are going to be closer to the surface. They're going to be closer to the surface, and so you have like more vibrancy. Whereas if you have, let's say, more absorbent paper, or if you remove the sizing of the paper by, let's say, stretching your paper, basically by like soaking it and then letting it stretch out and dry, then the pigments, they kind of sink deeper into the paper. They kind of sink deeper into that weave that we saw in that magnified photo. So, okay, so the idea of just pigments and gum arabic, which will eventually go on a paper, which is very durable, that's really important to know, because it shows like how you can play along with these particles.